I text you too.
All right. We are here. We're going to talk about Mabel. But before we do, Josh, get us started.
Okay. Let's see here. Let's do that. I'm going to try an Epiphany song. Let me be your everlasting light. The sun when there is none. I'm a shepherd for you, and I'll guide you through. Let me be your everlasting light. Let me be your everlasting light. I hold and never scold. In me you can confide when no one's by your side. Let me be your everlasting light. Oh baby, can't you see? I'm shining just for you. Loneliness is over. Dark days are through. Let me be your everlasting light. The train going away from the pain. Love is the coal that makes this train roll. Let me be your everlasting light.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah. That Brothers album is really good.
Getting ready to come out with a new album.
That was a good summer. Yeah. Okay. So, Todd, can you summarize for people Mabel's affliction, and just a little bit summarize the two sessions that she has with Robert Capon?
I would expect that everyone on our panel has had a Mabel or 10. In fact, we probably have been Mabel ourselves about one thing or another. Mabel, her her personal experience of loss and grief are common in the sense that some of the things she was experiencing, I think, are in the natural order of things. But she had some peculiar, I think in the second chapter, one of the interlocutors was suggesting she was well insulated. And so I think what that was a way of saying that she had kind of built up her protections against feeling anything other than kind of stuck in that anger place and looking for a scapegoat and someone to blame for the experiences of life. I think that's just like essential pastoral understanding that most of us human beings grapple with the arbitrariness of life in a way where we're overwhelmed by it, and it's hard to see any role we might have to play. And then once we have decided what role we're going to play, we adopt it, and it's very hard to break out of. And so I think she was captive at the same time. I really did find the second session to be also typical, and that is did you do what I said? And the answer was no. I think he was very patient in redirecting her, but I do want to say that he makes the point in that second chapter that what's the old saying? God can hit a lick with a crooked stick. And I think that he was saying that to those who are questioning his tact and tenor and such, he's like, well, I'm a coach. I'm not any of these things. I happen to every now and then get lucky with it. And so I think he was patient in helping her to see the ways that she hadn't put into practice, really the practice of the good news. And that's where I draw a distinction. The instructions that he had given are all pointing her back to what God has done in Jesus. And so it wasn't a sermon on here are the three things that will make your life successful and peaceful and happy. But it was, the life as it's arbitrary is difficult. It's messy. Sometimes you get it and sometimes you don't. And he kept pointing her faithfully to the good news, which I really appreciated at the point when he was saying what he was not, that his job was to give the good news. And if he happened to get lucky beyond that, well, there you go. So I don't know if you want any more than that before we got to kind of get into it, but I really did find her to be the most common of those that we've encountered so far, that anyone, even not pastoral, any person has encountered someone. Some of us have been Marta. And some of those who will be listening today will have been Marta in the story of Mabel. So,
So, Tony, Marty, Josh, do you have anything that you'd call attention to?
The world of the judgments that we make as individuals and how we wrestle with things of, was it right? Was it wrong? I mean, I think he talks about moralism and theological drag. We're trying to reason things out in a way where we come out better. Did she really miss her husband, or was it who she was in the story that was trying to find resolve and wanting what felt like maybe a blame on herself? The grief was not the dominant motif in a sense. The sense that things should be different and the inability to recognize that wrestling with who was right and who was wrong and what should have been done differently was all just veiling the fact that she couldn't find a place of hope, is maybe another word for forgiveness, a hope beyond the loss. Loss always leaves a vacuum that is somewhat pressing at us. And the question of could it have been different is certainly something we contemplate, but it easily is a place that one can get stuck in. For me, there was a kind of a personal sense in this, in that my daughter, who died of suicide, all three of my kids have wrestled with severe anxiety. She was maybe the most severe and was taking medications, but it was the anxiety. She grew up in a house with the man who married my ex, was a lawyer who ran things with a very rigid and difficult pressure on the kids and me and everything else. And so I found myself reading the story and just asking, at some level, can I forgive him? Would that help? Does it help? In the story, it doesn't help me to blame him, but my mind goes there. I'll be mowing the field and suddenly it's like, I'm going around the place where Anlia's ashes are buried. And the question comes up of what is at some level big question here. Does it make any difference to blame somebody who might have been the cause, or is there something beyond it where the gospel that Robert wants to take us to says, that whole way of being right and finding the person who is wrong, it is a trap that is set for our emotions. And while one could pursue blame, in the end, it will never grant you the possibility that he sees therapy ultimately wants to get us to a place where we're actually living life. And I wrote after Anlia died, I said, I think I heard Anlia say, "Dad, don't let my death be yours. You're meant to keep living life." And I really heard that as the intent of what was brought out here, that, you can't miss the life because of a death. And often it is the unforgiveness that chains us somehow to a past of wrestling with these questions. And so I've really lived with that sense that Anlia really was speaking, don't stop living because of my death. And I think that is the invitation that forgiveness offers to us. And that even as he explained the nature of Eucharist, there is a death, but it's a death that is intended to give life. And if you're taking it for any other reason than that, you're missing the point.
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
I didn't hear what you said there, Josh. Go ahead. I mean, we're almost 5 years removed from the pandemic. People are going to be not patient with the.
Okay, how
It
about
looks.
now?
There he
go.
goes.
I was going to say maybe USAID was funding your internet there.
In all fairness, I have some other buttons on the side that I thought might be responsible. Forgot the old mic muting. No, I just said thank you for sharing that, Marty. As far as the chapter goes, I don't think I thought about this in particular while reading it, but by listening to both of you share this week, he's got a title for something that the mystery of Christ addresses each time. And this one is grief. And I hear grief in the sense of what could have been, something that we can't change, and we can get stuck there. Somebody once said, a rut is a grave with both ends knocked out. You get stuck in a rut. But what I hear the mystery of Christ is Robert Farrar Capon wants to keep bringing people back to what's possible, or not even what's possible for you in light of what is already true. And the good news is such that he uses this metaphor in the chapter of, instead of lugging all this stuff around, why don't you metaphorically leave your baggage in my office and you go on and live your life. And if you need to check in on it, next time when you come back to see me, you can see that it's still there. But go out and live your life for what's possible because of what you truly have in Jesus Christ right now.
Yeah. Tony?
Well, I'm struggling with the current times we're living in, and
Join the club, brother.
and the idea that he suggests that God has no concern about evil. Yeah, I don't know what to do with that.
I don't know that he has no concern. I mean, therapy says we have concern, but we're not going to stay fixated on what's gone wrong. That somehow the nature of the goodness of God in the world says there's somewhere else to look than at the train wreck. And the train wreck doesn't go away, and the grief of the train wreck doesn't go away. But if you forget that there's looking forward, then you yourself have become part of the train wreck. At some level, our emotions are our relationships, so we can stay fixated on what's going on. And the more you watch the news, the more it grabs you and absorbs you and draws you in. And that the evil is, as much the being drawn into it as anything else. And so the ability to turn your eyes and say, there is something here that is possible, a relationship to people, which last night I was watching the Super Bowl with 5 other couples who were all quite Trump oriented. And for them, it was painful to watch the halftime, and words like DEI and things like that were flying through the air. And so, to sit there and not become defensive, but to keep directing back my affirmation for the ability to sit with them, the ability to watch a game where, we weren't concerned about winners or losers, but that being friends was a value that I wanted to be part of. It was all I could do, to keep my eyes looking forward and not be drawn into what one could call the evil of the moment. And it meant we all walked out as friends. And I felt like somehow, even though the game was a battle of its own, to walk out and say we survived that and affirmed our friendship. That may be all we can do in the moment, but it is leaving the bricks in the bag at the door and not letting them be thrown at one another. And so evil is not served in that choice, I think. And there is the possibility of moving forward to something that one can only hope that will be the tide that turns, that it is the real practice of sitting with people and not letting it collapse into brick throwing.
Well,
Same.
thank you for that. I guess I just
Say more, Tony.
I'm having a hard time not looking at the train wreck.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the format of this book being pastoral counseling conversations, sessions, so therapy is not public witness. But the content of his conversations in this book is pretty consistent with everything else that he writes. And I think, so I think, Tony, you're getting at, Fleming's critique of Capon, that if the gospel of grace is the football, he runs right out of the stadium with it. I don't know that you get in Capon what you get in Bart, for example, that no, the covenant is good. The covenant is grace. God does have a moral intent for the world, and and part of the church's vocation is to bear witness to that goodness and to call sin.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Those are helpful comments. Thank you.
Because it's, like Marty, the thing with, that you get in Bart, like sin, to know yourself a sinner is an achievement. And therefore the world cannot know what sin is unless the church is willing to name it, and bear witness to an alternative.
I
Which
wish
is-
that we were more broadly hired teachers.
That's good, Tony.
I do wake up every night and pray, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on a sinner like me. That's before I think anything. I just pray that to orient myself, that I am not in a position superior to anyone else to judge. And then I listen. And, I'm listening to ask, what is it that you would have me do to make a difference in a world where Bart does have a no. Within the yes is a no, and the no sees and says no's to those things that are evil. And so I don't turn a blind eye to what I see on the news or hear on the radio as I'm driving along. There's an acknowledgement of that says, I want my relationship with the people who are buying lies, which again, the nature of the lie is something to address as well, by being a person of the truth that says, you may believe those things. I believe differently because of the orientation of my life and a God who believes in telling the truth, living the truth, and that is a faithfulness to being gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, but not never angry. And so anger is an appropriate response to feel. Yes, forgives sin, iniquity, transgression. And the part in that passage in Exodus, not leaving the guilty unpunished is how people translate it. My understanding of it from my reading of Jewish and also my Hebrew professor says, it's not that he leaves us unpunished. It's that he's saying, I don't leave you unclean or unworked upon to the third and fourth generation. He said there were 3 and 4 generations in a home. So all God's saying is, I'm not giving up on you. I'm going to keep working on your family systems, your neighborhood. I'm just never giving up because that's the nature of the character of my love. But the not giving up doesn't turn away from saying that things are amiss or wrong. It says God's intent on the therapeutic work of working out family systems that have addictions of all types that run in them. He's just not going to give up because somebody has reached a point. He's going to keep going. And so to look at the news and say, I'm never giving up on the people. I'm giving up on political systems being the answer, but I'm not going to give up on the people. And so I'm just never giving up on y'all. And I'm going to hold out what I understand to be hope and health. I'm going to define health as intimacy, which requires honesty. It requires recognizing where things have been amiss and going and saying, I'm going to go forward and I'd like to go forward with you. So there is a sense within all of it that the heart of God keeps showing up and saying, don't give up. And forgiveness doesn't mean that you haven't seen a train wreck. And grieve with those who are grieving, and those who are celebrating who you can't believe that they're celebrating. Bite your tongue a little bit and say, who I am can't see what you see, but for you, I get that there's something there. And be as honest as possible. And I do think that somehow honesty is just got to be a major part of going forward. We have to make sure, as I think Upon always wants to do, is we've got to be more honest instead of veiling our lies that coddle ourselves and tell the truth. And he wiggles and gets people ultimately to do that, I think.
So towards the end of the first chapter, the Mabel sessions, he's talking to her about faith and reconciliation and our reconciliation with God through Christ. And he says, consider the scene in church on a Sunday. Here are a bunch of people, more or less dressed to the nines, in an expensive building with maybe very spectacular music and even a paid choir, deliberately celebrating the worst thing the human race, which includes them, has ever done: the murder of God. Do you see the point? They've taken the rottenest thing that ever happened and reinstalled it in their lives as a joyful remembrance. They haven't run away from the evil. They've actually made it the centerpiece of their celebration. They've taken what should have caused only alienation, and by the pardon that flows from it to them, they've turned it into a festival of reconciliation. And she says, but I don't know if I believe that. The reconciliation, I mean. You could decide to. We're back at faith again. In the long run, it's the only product I've got in the store. I think what I like about that, Tony, to your concern, which I identify with, is that there is a vertical and a horizontal component to Christ's passion, right? That Capon's getting at. I preached on this just this past Sunday that, that in John's gospel in particular, Jesus is the active agent of his dying. It's a deed that he does. He's firmly in control. And yet at the same time, that vertical act has a horizontal revelation in that it exposes the corruption and evil and decadence of all of our human systems. And I think one of the aspects of Capon continually going back to the image of God as a bookkeeper that a lot of people have in their heads is that the idea of a God who is keeping the books on each of us, with our ledgers in the red, is I think the presupposition that like there is something we could do to get it in the black. And so if we just exhort people to do X, Y, or Z, or to vote this way or that way, then we can get rid of our red. And so I think, and a corollary, right, to Capon's focus on grace really is to have a stronger understanding of the law. And maybe I said that last week, but it's moralism is the problem with moralism is that it's law light. It's not the law. And so, yeah, so I think it's yeah. So I think the solution is to like lean into the law and be clear about the gospel, not muddle the two of them together.
Well, all that you said, yes. I think for we recovering fundamentalist legalists, seeing the way that Capon keeps using the imagery of bookkeeper, God's not keeping score, God's not keeping a ledger, is a bit refreshing. So maybe it doesn't strike us because as in the same way, because we've been told that the score is being kept from beginning to end.
Oh, I get that. And Josh and I exist in a denomination where the Council of Bishops just wrote a letter to President Trump that sounds like it could have been written by Elizabeth Warren. So we do like, we're no strangers to fundamentalism. It just sounds different.
Now I like obviously I like the Eucharist. What I'm thinking of right now
Josh,
is
glad to hear that, Josh.
You're welcome.
I mean, if you didn't, and then like, you died and you're like, well, shit, foretaste of heaven. Like, this is going to be boring.
Now, what I'm thinking of in the moment is that we repeat it. Whether it is once a week or once a month, or drag it out even a little bit longer than that, but I don't recommend it. It's that we keep coming back because, like Mabel leaving the luggage at the priest's office. When I bring my baggage to the altar table, Christ's once and for all sacrifice already took it away, but I just go fill up a new bag. And so I have to, not only do I bring it back, but I have to be reminded. I think there's something I'd want to go on a tangent about the utility and helpfulness. It's a gift that we have ritual. I think it's really a gift that we have ritual. And yet, my memory is so short
Mm-hmm.
that as soon as I, leave the worship space, I can forget all the reconciliation that we just celebrated. And yet Christ invites us back again and again to hear, to be built up by the word, to be offered his body and blood, and said, I've made all things new. All you have to do is believe it, and then go love your neighbor in light of it.
Yeah, there's in the second chapter, he says, because I think Capon's writing and preaching only makes sense if you really take seriously what Paul says in Romans and Corinthians, that the gospel is the power of God at work in the world, and that's why you stick to it. But Robert, so he says, the truth that makes us free is always ticking away like a time bomb in the basement of everybody's church. And that truth isn't a bunch of ideas, it's Jesus. And by that, he means the gospel. Sooner or later, if we just sit still and listen, he'll blow the lid off any prison that we have built. And I think that's right. I think it's very Pauline. I think it's very scriptural. And for anyone who has been a pastor or a trustee, like church basements are gross. Like, so it's like, that the gospel sitting down there ticking like a bomb is that it has been unliked and long neglected. And so it's like, yeah. I used to think that when people would say, I've never heard this before, it was just like, well, they weren't in the right frame of mind or the place in life to hear it. But more and more, I'm like, well, no, maybe you've actually never heard it before. Like, maybe it was in the basement, and you were hearing a lot of other things instead.
Which maybe is why we should put the Eucharist right up front, because otherwise it's the congratulations for having made it through the service and done everything to get ourselves ready. But if they did hear it right up front every time, this is the Eucharist, the thanksgiving for what has already been done. And all that we're going to do after this is going to be responding to that. But let's get the point right up front. This is the body of Christ given for you. In him you have died, and in him you've been raised. Come partake of the gift of life that's already been given to you. And so everything we do is just a response to the grace and not an earning of it.
Yeah. And I think, like embedded in the Eucharist is, I mentioned, like it's an achievement to know yourself as a sinner. It's part of the reason with repeating the message over and over again is that the world, i.e., regular people, like they need to be set free to obey and embody the commandments.
And just for clarity, what do you mean when you say to know ourselves as a sinner? What is it that you want or think should go through our head when you say we should know ourselves as a sinner?
No, I mean, so to keep it pinned to the Eucharist, that we are all people who put in one situation or next out of our very best intentions would kill God. But that's, it was the best and brightest of Israel in Rome that killed Jesus, not a gang of thugs.
And that's why in our ritual, we have, not only do we have a prayer of confession that the pastor leads the congregation, but there's a moment in our liturgy for them to offer forgiveness to the person who's presiding at the celebration, because I could have just shared the gospel, gritting my teeth, going, I hope that guy in the second row hears it today. In the very offering of good news,
Yeah. So part of the danger too, I think, in doing the opposite of what Capon does and just moralism and exhortation is that legalistic Christianity presumes that the people on the receiving end of it are capable of fulfilling it. And until Jesus has set them free through the gospel, their wills are bound. I'm enough of a Lutheran to agree with that.
Which the shorthand for that is people will focus on themselves unless they're focused on Christ and who he is to them in the present moment and going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe in like Todd's tradition, that kind of legalism looks like, consigning other people to judgment and damnation. And I think in Josh and my, tradition, it takes a different form, but it's just as binding.
And none of it's humble.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think in the main line, it looks like turning other people into our personal projects of righteousness. So there's not fire and brimstone, but it's treating the poor like our personal righteousness projects.
And the righteousness project of he has shown thee what is good to do justly. That's us doing what we consider right. And loving mercy is the extension of not judging to another person, right? It's the saying, I'm not going to judge you, but we want to receive mercy and judge others. That's our program. And the humble part, well, we'll get to that later.
And Josh, I think part of what you said, you were expressing gratitude for ritual. But I also, so like, this is the place where we should talk about discipline, right? That discipline is not spiritual disciplines are not the process by which I sanctify myself or grow holier or like climb one rung up, the next rung up the ladder to heaven. Disciplines are the the fences we put around ourselves to make sure that we're consistently hearing this promise.
Or to Marty's point earlier, it's to allow God to continue to work on us.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Place the clay in the hands of the potter.
So like disciplines are to like return us to the promise of our baptism over and over again.
Amen.
Well, if you want to know what a good number in what you refer to as my tradition, just read or listen to Al Mohler Jr.'s The Briefing every day. That's all you need to do. You want to know what it's like? That kind of legalism and lack of grace.
Like?
It would be like being waterboarded, but that would be an illustration.
I mean,
always consigning everyone to something that you're not.
It's a worthwhile conversation that, actual baptism should look more like waterboarding than it does sprinkling. Like this doesn't look like a drowning.
Well, we do.
We're going to change
make it look like a drowning.
United Methodist Church.
We could totally waterboard people in most of our churches.
I've never thought about that.
It seems like there's a sense that every day in every sermon we should be reminding people of the heart of the Father made available in Jesus. And to take Bart's yes, to say that yes is just saying to the heart of the Father revealed in the person of Jesus. So that Bart's, everywhere is saying, follow the command of God. What's that? It's just saying yes to the things the Father says yes to and no to the things that he says no to. And that's what the discipline of learning to walk by the Spirit is, the simplicity of living from the heart of love, to say yes to the right things and to say no. And yes, Tony, I think it's appropriate for you to be saying no to things that it's worthy of saying no to. But it has to be from a heart of love and not just from a heart of anger and frustration. And that's the hard part that Bart takes us to. And I think Kapan, it's got to be from the heart of love that you say no, but we need to say no. But it's because love has become so engendered into our being.
And Marty, like, so one of the, if I could make it so that like people forgot the phrase cheap grace in relation to Bonhoeffer, like I would, that and Wounded Healer too, like I just expunge them from collective memory. But to your saying yes to the heart of the Father, so like Bonhoeffer in Discipleship talks about how the Jesus who called the disciples still calls disciples, like he's not dead, and therefore the commandments in Scripture should not be treated as universal principles, but instead, like discipleship is instead moment to moment, day to day, saying yes or no to the Christ who calls. And so faithfulness in 2025 doesn't look like just shouting, like Leviticus 19 said, like it's like what is Jesus calling me to today, and saying yes to that, which may be hard, it may not be, and it may be it won't be hard.
That's the discipleship journey, though, right? It is the attuning that really comes to know the heart of the Father, and not merely the commandments that one thinks that you're supposed to obey, or a verse to pin on a situation.
Because like I mentioned baptism earlier, that like I don't know that our liturgy makes it clear enough that when we talk about the mighty acts of God in the context of the baptismal liturgy, like those aren't over, and like we're part of, like, you could reprint the Bible now and include, the history of the church from the last, 1800 years, like it's ongoing. And the stuff in the Bible is meant for us to discern how Jesus is calling us now. They're not just, like concrete principles to like be woodenly applied in a legalistic fashion.
And the Spirit gives us ears to hear.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a Spirit dimension also to be learned.
Mm-hmm.
That part of, I don't think that one of the things I was wrestling with, but I didn't necessarily articulate when I was talking about ritual, is a lot of times, Capon is talking about changing the Eucharist. Instead of the worst thing that's ever been done, now it's a celebration of reconciliation. Sometimes we think of rituals as like, we've talked before about a funeral is one of the purposes in a funeral is to get the dead where they're going and the living where they need to be. And we think of a funeral as a one-time event. Like, okay, you've done that. You don't get to repeat it. Now deal with your grief and, be over it. But your grief lives with you. You carry it forward. And I think in the same way that Capon is talking about living this celebration of the reconciliation over and over again, I was just thinking about we end our liturgy with, eternal God, we give you thanks for this holy mystery in which you have given yourself to us. Grant that we may go into the world in the strength of your Spirit to give ourselves for others. Now that may be any given moment or any given day, that may be being a little more patient, but in the weight that Tony's bringing to the program tonight, it may be presented with an opportunity to speak the truth that's going to invite me into a place to be imprisoned, harmed, Marty's example of sharing time with friends and saying, like, maybe this got awkward, and I feel excluded from that friend group. And I'm not saying, we need to go in these things and provoke something. We always have to listen to the Spirit, but giving ourselves for others is, I think we were, Jason, when you were saying Fleming says Capon takes the football and runs right out of the stadium, I also think he brings me back in this delightful, humorous way to saying it's just another day to offer the gospel, to bear witness to it,
Yeah, I do. I was thinking earlier because he mentions the communion of saints in the second chapter. I think Christians in America who are dominated by a narrative of decline, right, don't have a robust enough sense that actually the church is much bigger than you think it is, and the saints who have gone before constitute a much bigger church than the church. Like, we're not alone, and the church is much bigger, and so therefore be hopeful. But also, Tony, I think therefore be bold, and so not to make it about myself, but in my own church right outside of DC, one of my lay leaders and very good friends and is a Republican talking head on one of the cable networks. But I also have another lay leader, a woman who is very high up in the intelligence, one of the intelligence departments, and she told me on Sunday, she's like, nobody's doing any work right now. Like, it's so chaotic. She's like, we're more vulnerable than we've ever been. And it's,
Jason, don't say this. This podcast is across the globe.
Goes around the world.
she's like
anybody who was thoughtful would know that is the case.
Yeah, and
right, that's obvious.
And so, like, I was thinking this morning, like, Robert Jensen's got this essay about the two cities, and he says, like, well, no, sometimes to speak of God and to preach, it requires you to speak as an executioner. And what reminded me of that is because, like, I'm not a lectionary preacher, but I noticed all the lectionary texts for this coming Sunday are like, woe to you who are rich, like if you're putting your trust in mere mortals, like, cover your ass, and so it's like the context is impossible to ignore, and so it's that if the good news is that while we were yet enemies, Christ died to justify the ungodly, well, that means, like, our natural state is to be enemies of God and ungodly. And so, like, you can't present the promise in a way that gilds the lily, like it's you gotta. So it just seems like
I think part of my struggle, and I appreciate the many comments and that I had that in mind, but I know it's not mine alone by any means, is that I'm not able to treat this as a binary and just say that's really bad and I'm not. I was in a group last night and somebody said, we Democrats, and I said, well, actually I don't think of myself as a Democrat.
Yeah.
And so but I do find myself wondering if how you say no when it's not when the I don't know, the enemy is not clear, when it seems to transcend politics in some sense. I mean, it's not like it's just the solution is Democrats do better and our side wins if that were my side. It's more like a sickness unto death.
Yeah, I mean, one of the sicknesses, right, is that we're all living at a time when everything is politicized.
Yeah.
Like one of you mentioned the Super Bowl halftime show. I didn't watch the Super Bowl. I was at the gym. Like I'm not a football fan minus the Washington Commanders. Like I have no idea like what the show was. I just know like everyone's arguing about it. Like,
But it's not just political, it's economic. I mean, economics have become the world. The price of my gas and a gallon of milk and a dozen eggs. Who holds the money? Who can we trust that they know how to run things? I mean, I think politics is kind of just a cover for the root of all evil is the love of money. And it's become a core value to the point that people are willing to sacrifice anything of grace and forgiveness or anything as long as I get what's going to give me the money to give an imagined life. It doesn't even have to be a real life. Because I think people still could buy their milk and their gas and all those things, but it was an imagination that it could be better for me. And so the truth that you can't serve two masters is certainly true. And right now, it appears that the money master is leading the way.
And that's it. Yeah.
Go ahead.
And, no, like Josh mentioned ritual, you know, like one of the rituals in the church is to make people hear and say, Lord, in your mercy, to the 10 commandments during Lent. You know, like, so part of the problem is like, there's other things that we want to say rather than the things that the church has given us to say.
Yeah.
That maybe Christians like Josh and me and Tony, at least in our traditions that I know of, spend too much time opposing displaying the 10 commandments in courtrooms and not teaching them.
If we think of the Old Testament and think of the priests basically ended up being religious moralists, the kings ended up being political and going for what success looked like in the eyes of the people. The prophets came along and Hosea is an amazing example of right now. You know, the people have totally gone astray. And Hosea, I need you to go marry an adulterous woman.
Todd, you should do this. You would go viral in Oklahoma.
But it's the heart of the Father, right? It's like, I have to show them the seriousness of the real problem.
Yeah.
It just left me. And the only thing I can do is show them in living color, not once, not twice, but at least 3 times, showing this is what you're doing to me. But it's all the heart of the Father, chapter 11. It's my love that does this. Can't you see that it's always been my love? I've raised you up. I brought you myself. I taught you how to drive, everything.
We should pitch this as like a Real Housewives kind of show, like pastors marrying hookers to point towards the unfaithfulness of the United States.
You don't even have to get another woman. You just have to ask your spouse if she'll do the full Mar-a-Lago, and then she'll look completely different.
Pam will understand, Todd.
No.
I'm pretty sure that would be way more popular than our current operation.
It's going to be
The
one of
thing
those
is,
times
the
where she's going
prophets
to be glad you
were hated and rejected because they spoke the truth in very visual, vibrant ways. And that's the hard thing right now, is to find a medium that you can be a prophet that really comes from the love of God, but shocks the pants off people, literally.
All right. So Project Hosea, starring Todd Littleton. Instead of the like he gets us commercials, it could be like he's pissed at you. I think we have a winner here.
That's funny.
All right, we can talk about this more, Todd.
We can start printing T-shirts. And
Yeah,
say,
we
"I'm
will
a
have some
Gomer."
time to do that.
But this is Capon too, right? Capon is a shocker. He's trying to shock people with a love that's so audacious that you have to sit up and go, "What? No, that can't be it." Where's that ever happened before? Oh yeah.
What I mean, yeah. So what's the sex worker like economy in Tuttle, Oklahoma? We might have to.
I can't imagine it would be very strong.
I bet it would surprise you. I'm betting it would surprise you.
Oh,
It's another red state paradox.
I would say your remark might be, surprised. You might be surprised. So,
But I think Tony has an appropriate grief. I mean, I think the point of this section, it's totally appropriate to have grief. And God has grief in that moment when he sends Hosea. That is an act of grief that says, I'm not going to do nothing. The heart of God truly is taken to grief. And Tony, I think it's totally appropriate for you to feel that level of grief.
Yeah, I mean, so just to close, Capon says in the second chapter, forgiveness, therefore, is not a psychological matter or a religious matter or a spiritual matter. It is a political matter. It's the centerpiece of the politics of the new order. Politics is the art of the possible. And I think, like we've talked about the Old Testament some, that one of the reasons for Yom Kippur is that sin destabilizes communities. And so you have to set things right. It's not a private transaction between you and God or between you and some other person. It's about the community that God is trying to build.
yeah, I was going to bring it back to Mabel. I know you're trying to close here, Jason, and say that, I think what I'm experiencing is grief. I find myself, kind of like that classic, this can't really be happening.
Mhm.
Yep.
Stage one. Anyhow, good to be with y'all.
Yeah. So we will see you next week, and hopefully I will look less stupid.
I think it's great.
I did too.
Was it the haircut?
I accidentally, I should not shave with no glasses on. It's a lesson I refuse to learn, like other lessons that my wife could. She's got a list. She could tell you. So.
Hey, I won't be here next week. So
Because
well, I announce and have been announcing basketball games for over 20 years, and for some reason they scheduled a Monday game. They're always on Tuesday, but next Monday is senior night, and I will